Welcome to OLC 4.0. This is term 2B. Today is class 5. We're going to be looking at assignments numbers 6 and 7 and looking at the different types of sentences. This is Jillian Percy, and here are all the different ways to contact us. If you want to talk to us while we are in the studio, 1-800-465-7144. If you want to talk privately, the office number is 1-800-667-3703, and my extension is 2211. Keep in mind, there's only somebody here at the office till about 4:30, and after that, I don't know if it rings through if there's nobody in the front desk. My email is jillian.percy@nnec.on.ca. That is the most reliable way to reach me because I check that constantly throughout the day. Facebook is capital G, capital P-E-R-C-Y, space capital W-A-H-S-A. If you send me a friend request for there, please make sure to also send me like a little message saying your full name, what course you're taking with me, and what assignment you are looking for help with. That way, when I get back to you, I already have an idea what we're going to be talking about. There are two different places you can look for the courses. There is a school channel called the Wassa Distance Education Center. It has this course, but the version that I taught in September. Now it's the exact same class. There may be like super minor little differences, but basically it's all there. Now I am loading this current version onto my teacher channel, which is at the G Percy Wassa, same thing as the Facebook. Like I said, it doesn't really make a big difference, but just in case this is the one you're following along with, it won't be found on the school one. It's only on my teacher one, okay? Okay, how to hand in assignments. This is the most commonly asked question. First of all, whenever you hand in work, please send it to studentwork@nnec.on.ca. If you send it to me, I still just forward it to that address. So it's best just to send it that way in the first place. The secretary can log that you submitted the work. It goes into our database. Always include your full name, your course name, the assignment number, and the name right on the physical paper, not just in the email, because it gets printed off. I don't see the original email. I just see the actual paper on my marking stack. So if it hasn't got your name in the course and all that kind of stuff, I don't necessarily know who you are or what we're working with. If an assignment asks for a rough and a good draft, please label which one is which and include them both in the same email. Now, having said that, if you want to hand in the rough draft and get some feedback, I'm perfectly fine with that. Just kind of make a little note at the bottom saying, hey, let me know what you think, because you want to, make some improvements before you hand in the good draft. So if you have a learning center in your community, you can go to the DEC, ask them to scan your assignments and send them along to me. Hang on to your originals. You will need them for the portfolio project, which we do at the very end. You can also fax them to me, 1-800-463-7852. That's if you're in Ontario. If you're anywhere else in Canada, 1-877-990-2023. If you are faxing, you want to make sure that the lettering is dark. So typed or pen. Pencil, for some reason, shows up very kind of glitchy and pixelated. It's very hard to read. You can also scan it yourself using a scanner app on your phone and send it to me, which I'll talk about more in a slide or two. You can mail it to me, but I don't recommend it. It can take a long time. Things get lost. Make sure to hang on to the originals. If you do your assignments in Google Docs or in Google Slides, you are welcome to just share them with me. That's fine. I can print them off that way too. You can also hand assignments in by photograph. People do that through Facebook or sometimes through email. Now, what's the difference between the scanner versus the photograph? Basically, the scanner is going to produce a much higher quality of a copy of your work, and it'll be way easier for me to read. But you can try doing the photograph if you want to. Make sure it's clear, not blurry. Don't make it be slanted because otherwise the writing gets all distorted. It's very hard to read. Preferably written in pen or typed so it's dark enough for me to read. And then don't just click the share button. When you do that, it comes up an odd size. So I don't know about yours. Mine gives me the option of emailing or email as an attachment. Always select email as an attachment. And then in your subject line, you can tell me, I am Tara so-and-so. I'm taking this course. This is assignment number, blah, blah, blah. It's the rough copy or it's the rough copy and the good copy. Then when you do that, it comes up as an attachment in a way that it's very easy for me to pull up and print. For some reason, when it's just cut and pasted as the email, it's weirdly hard to make it print properly. I got to play around with it for a while to get it the right size. Um, then we've got the scanner app. This is not my poster. Someone else made this, presumably some happy marketing person at Adobe. This is from Adobe Scanner. I use that all the time. It's free. Adobe's a really reliable company. It's pretty easy to use. It's not much harder to use than your phone, really. First, obviously, download the app, then open it. Take a picture of your work. Now, you see how there's those little blue lines? They help you line it up to make sure it fills the entire frame of the photograph. You can adjust the borders. If you've got a little bit of the table in, you can kind of adjust it and narrow that out. And then you just kind of do steps 2 and 3 over and over until you have the entire assignment scanned. Then tap continue. You can go through your work. If one came up blurry, you can retake it. You can order it. Hit save to PDF, give it a name, and then share it with me as an attachment or save it to Google Drive, Dropbox, your phone, your computer, wherever you feel like saving it, that's fine. Okay, so here are our learning goals for today. Understand the 4 main different types of sentences and how to punctuate them. Understand and use different reading strategies before you read. Understand and practice different ways and times to ask a question. Understand and practice making predictions before we read a book or a new chapter. Understand and practice connections before and during reading a test. Use visualizing to demonstrate understanding of a text. And then read, answer details, summarize events, express opinions, and make connections relating to Chapter 1 of our novel, Jimmy Comes Home. Okay, so starting off with different sentences. I always start with the grammar, and there's kind of 2 reasons for that. One is if you don't need a lot of grammar stuff, you can just kind of skip over the grammar and go right over to the assignments. But a lot of times, the assignment is going to use some of the grammar stuff that we're teaching, so I want to make sure I kind of get it in there first. And also, if you're just looking for some quick grammar information, you don't have to go through the entire course. You can just hit the first, usually 10-15 minutes of the class, and that usually has the grammar and mechanics kind of portion of the course. Okay, so there are 4 main sentence types. This is something you probably learned in school, but they may have given you the easier names. So the easier names would be like a telling sentence, an asking, unexcited, and then a command. So the more official title is declarative, which is a telling sentence, interrogative, which is an asking or a question sentence, imperative, which is a command, and exclamatory, which is you're excited. Okay? Most of these sentences follow the format of subject first and then predicate like we've been practicing. A declarative sentence or a statement, this is the most common type of sentence, and it simply tells you information, description, narration, opinions, all that kind of thing. They will end with a period. Examples might be things like, I like the red car. The train leaves at 1:15 p.m. The tree was covered in red and yellow leaves. So it's just telling you stuff. All right, then we have exclamatory sentences. These are the ones that are excited. They're usually showing strong emotion and sometimes like loud volume. They will end with an exclamation point like, I hate you, or today is the best day ever. The murderer is one of us. I will love you forever. So strong emotion. They are telling you something, but the emotion is the important part. And then we have imperative sentences. These are commands or sometimes instructions. They can end with a period normally, but they do sometimes end with an exclamation point if the person is commanding you in a very excited way. Like if they're saying, get out because there's a fire or something, then you might have an exclamation point. They generally start with the verb first, and the subject is assumed to be you. We don't usually write that, but it's assumed. So if I say, get out of here, there's kind of like an invisible you in front of it. Okay? So it's still coming first, but it's invisible. We don't see it. One of those kind of weird things of English. Put the chicken in the oven at 350 degrees Celsius. So this is more of an instruction than a command, but it's the same kind of idea. Turn left at the corner to go to the grocery store. Okay. So for each of these, if you put the word you in front, the sentence would make sense. You put the chicken in the oven at 350 degrees Celsius. You turn left at the corner to go to the grocery store. Now, sometimes in dialogue, like if you're reading a novel, they might put a person's name, like maybe a mom is in a room full of kids and she's only talking to one kid. So she might say, Steve, turn left at the corner to go to the grocery store. So it still comes first, but it's kind of set off a little bit because we're using that person's name to kind of get their attention almost. All right. Then we've got the interrogative or question sentences. These ones ask a question and use a question mark at the end of it. We will talk more about questions, but we're going to cover the basics today. The basics are we use who, what, where, when, why, or how. And the question word is acting as the subject. Who are you? What are you doing this evening? Where did the money go? When does school end? Why is your brother crying? So these are all a type of pronoun. So it's still usually following the format of subject plus predicate. Now, there is a special type called an inverted question. And that's where we don't use a question word. Instead, we flip the subject and the verb, and we kind of use our voice to indicate that it is a question. It still uses a question mark at the end, okay? So things like if I said, are you ready to go? So if I was telling you, you are ready to go, I'm telling you a sentence. But if I'm asking you, I put the verb first. Are you ready to go? Okay. Were you angry with him? Let me think. Do we have pop in the house? Okay. So this is one where it's not following the normal structure. Okay. But the ones that use the question words are these ones. We've got the verb first. Were you angry with him? Do we have pop in the house? All right. So, hang on. Keep forgetting to fix these. That's all right. So we're going to take a look at a sentence and decide which type is it. Democracy is when you choose a leader through voting. Is that a declarative, interrogative, imperative, or an exclamatory? Okay, so that is a declarative. I'm just telling you a fact. Okay, I'm scared. Okay, the moment you see that exclamation point and you read the sentence, it's not a command, right? I'm just telling you information, but I'm telling you with lots of emotion. That means it's an exclamatory sentence. Okay? The town meeting will start at 8 o'clock tonight. All right. I'm not asking a question. I'm not giving you a command, and I'm not excited, which means by default, it is a declarative, which, like I said, that's the most common type of sentence. Okay? What day is your race on? Okay, so you see the question mark? Automatically, that means it's a question sentence, interrogative. Clean up this mess right now. Okay, so there is an exclamatory, so it could be this one, but you can hear I'm being bossy, right? There's no subject. The subject is that assumed subject of you, which means it's a command. It's imperative. Okay? So that's kind of like a little mini practice quiz there. All right, what is a compound sentence? A compound sentence is when you join two simple sentences together to form one new, larger sentence. Sometimes discussing this can get confusing, so we try to make it clearer by calling each of those smaller sentences a clause, okay? And a clause is just a group of words that contains a subject and a verb, just like a small sentence. It can sometimes stand alone as a sentence all by itself. And when it does that, we call it an independent clause, or sometimes we'll call it a main clause, okay? A compound sentence will have two of those independent clauses joined together by a conjunction and a comma. You cannot join two small sentences together with a comma alone, okay? There must be a conjunction as well. So here's an example of how that would look. The coordinating conjunctions that we use for compound sentences are, there's only 7 of them: for and nor, but or yet, and so, okay? I love to go out dancing, comma, but I also love to stay home reading a book. So in yellow, I love to go out dancing. That's my first clause or sentence. And then I also love to stay home reading a book is my second clause. And I've joined them with the comma and the but. Okay? So here are some other ones using these other examples. I want to kind of quickly go over. You can't necessarily use these all interchangeably. Okay, so the most neutral one, is and. And you could use for anything because it's just joining, okay? If you want contrast, contrast is things like nor, or but, or sometimes. Actually, you know what? I'm going to say but or yes, yet for this one, okay? But or yet. Choices are or nor. Nor is when they're negative choices, like you don't want them. And then let's see, reasons are for or so. So if you're joining sentences, think about what meaning you're trying to get across and why you're joining them so that you're using the right joining word, okay? So I want to go see Grandma for this Christmas is her first without Grandpa. I'm telling you the reason why. I love to go to the movies, or I could also go out to dinner. I'm telling you my choices. I do not want to go skiing, nor do I wish to go skating. Also choices, but in a negative fashion. John played hockey in the winter, and he played baseball in the summer. That's kind of neutral. I'm just joining the two sentences. I hoped to go to the concert, but I haven't saved enough money. I'm contrasting those two ideas. They oppose each other. He refused to do his homework, so his parents turned off the internet. I'm explaining the reason for why the first sentence happened. He wanted to ask her out, yet he was afraid she would turn him down. So again, contrast. Now, here are some examples that do not count as compound because sometimes people will think that if they see any of those conjunctions, for and nor, but or yet or so, it automatically makes that sentence a compound sentence. But it's not always true. Conjunctions can sometimes be joining up words or phrases instead. It only counts as a compound sentence if it's joining two independent clauses or complete sentences. So if I said, I don't like fishing or hunting, that's not a compound sentence. I'm just giving you two possible choices of things in my simple sentence. I would like to go to dinner, then we could go watch a movie. Now, this sounds an awful lot like a compound, but it's not because then is not a coordinating conjunction. This is actually a complex sentence, which we'll talk about a little bit more later. I have always loved playing broom ball, comma, I am very good at it. This is not a compound because we didn't use a conjunction, just a comma. So I'm also going to point out this is incorrect. This is important because it's probably the most common grammatical error I see. And I do knock off marks for it because it's not a correct way to write a sentence in English. I know we do a lot of that kind of writing in like Messenger or email, but for formal writing like school, which is what we're doing, you've got to use the formal rules of writing, okay? Oh, so hang on a second. Once again, let me see here. Okay. I can't wait to eat dinner so I can go to the movie. Is that correct as a compound sentence? Well, I can't wait to eat dinner. I can go to the movie. That's two simple independent clauses. I've got my comma and my conjunction, so that is correct. She loves going shopping, comma. She is excited to pick up new clothes. Well, she loves going shopping is a full sentence, and she's excited to pick up new clothes is a full sentence. But I can't join two sentences together using a comma all by itself, so this is incorrect. He had waited all summer to get on the school football team, for he could barely sleep the night before tryouts. Now, this one is a little bit tricky. He had waited all summer to get on the football team. That's a full sentence, sure. He could barely sleep the night before tryouts. That's also a full sentence. I do have a comma and I do have a conjunction, but here's the thing. I don't start the second sentence with a capital. I would have a lowercase. So I would need to fix that. So right now, as this stands, this is technically a little bit incorrect, okay? First, we moved to a small town, and later we moved to the big city. Correct or incorrect? First, we moved to a small town. That's a full sentence. Comma, and that's a conjunction with a comma. Good. Later, we moved to the big city. Yeah, that's correct. That's perfectly fine as a sentence. I am not interested in trying out for football, nor am I interested in playing hockey. So I am not interested in trying out for football. That's a full sentence. Um, am I interested in playing hockey? Also a full sentence. There is a conjunction, but I've forgotten my comma. So I would say this is also incorrect, although only mildly incorrect, because I do know what you're trying to say. Okay, moving on. We're going to start talking about reading strategies to use before you begin reading. And they're just kind of a way to get your brain ready to understand what you're going to do. Sometimes we just kind of dive into our work and we haven't sort of taken a moment to kind of get ourselves ready. The way I think of it is like, is if you're a baseball catcher, you could just catch the ball with your bare hand, but it's gonna hurt and you're not gonna be ready. It's better to put on your face mask and get your mitt ready and kind of get yourself braced to do the work. So we're kind of bracing ourselves a little bit before we do our reading work here, okay? A reading strategy, if you've never heard that before, it's just the idea of a thinking strategy, just a way to think about what we read. So some strategies work best before reading, others work great at any time, others are better at the end. Some of the ones that we're going to look at right now for before are things like asking questions before we read, making connections before we read, or making predictions before we read. Now, this is the kind of thing that has been very popular in, say, the last maybe 10 to 15 years of teaching. So if you were in school pretty recently, you probably have done this. But if you are a little bit older like me, this is not how they taught us back in the day. So this may be a little bit new, okay? It's not really any harder. It may just be kind of a new way of thinking about stuff. Now, asking questions is a strategy you can actually use at any time, before you read, during the reading, or after we read. When you do it before we read, we ask some questions before we read it to kind of get your brain working and thinking about how you're going to make sense of what you read. Sometimes in our cases, I'm asking some questions, and it's a good idea to just kind of read over the questions to be ready to catch those ideas when you come across them. During reading, there's a lot of research that shows that looking at the questions you need to answer before you start reading can help you remember what you read more effectively. Some people will kind of be looking at those questions and reading them as they're doing stuff. You can also be asking questions of yourself, right? You can also ask your own questions. And even the word like I wonder, by the way, I wonder why. That is a type of question that is very common to ask. If you don't do a lot of reading, I don't know, not everybody does this, but if you think about how you watch TV shows, you might sometimes find yourself asking a lot of questions during TV shows, depending on what you're like. Some people that drives them crazy. Other people are like, oh, why are they doing that? What is she so upset for? I don't understand. And you'd be asking questions, especially if you're watching it with a friend and you're kind of engaging in that way. That's the kind of questions I'm talking about, right? After reading, you can ask or answer questions after you read to help you figure out the important points or key details about what you read. Sometimes I'm asking the questions. Sometimes you might be asking your own questions, depending on the assignment or depending on whether you're reading all by yourself. So there are three main categories of questions. Now, I don't quite like how okay, so questions, I'm going to rephrase this a little bit. So questions that, all right, hang on. It's not that the question is directly stated. Questions that look for info that is directly stated. So it's right there in the book. You will be able to find it. It will just be right there. Okay. Now, a lot of times, hang on, people think that's the only type of question, and then they get really frustrated when any of these other kinds of questions come up, and they will come up in my course and probably in just about any course you take with us, okay? These are questions that look for info that is indirectly stated. So it's not spelled right out. You're going to have to kind of read between the lines and do some thinking and figure things out. And then there are questions that ask you to make connections. There are three main types of connections that we make. Connections to yourself, to other texts, or to the world. Sorry. Okay. Now, like I said, if you've never done this before, it may sound a little bit weird, but we will kind of get the hang of it. The big thing is after a while, you'll be able to kind of look and notice, oh, I know what they're looking for here. Okay. And then it becomes much easier to find. The frustrating thing is sometimes it's looking for information that's indirectly stated, and people are looking all through the story or the article and going, it's not there, because they're not realizing that they've got to kind of make some conclusions and do some thinking on their own, do a little bit of detective work. Okay. So some keywords when it's information that's directly stated, things like find, list, locate, identify, or tell. Indirect, they might say things like predict, use clues to, think about. Making connections might be things like, what do you think about? What do you do if? In your opinion, have you ever felt this way? Those kind of ideas. So directly stated information, the way they word the question is a clue that that's the kind of information they're looking for. It's usually very specific and often very detail oriented, like when did he get to school? Who does he live with? Where did the little boy go? What happened when the principal called him into the office? These are the kind where you can just like look through the text and just find it. Indirectly stated information, I think this is the toughest type because you have to read between the lines. It might say, how do you think the character feels? Now, there might not be any spot in the story where it says, I feel sad. When it's saying, how do you think, it's more or less asking for your opinion. But they don't want you to just pull your opinion out of thin air. They do want you to look at the text and see, how is the person acting, or what are they saying that might give you a clue about how they might feel. So maybe the character walked in, shouted, slammed a door, went outside, kicked a dog. Well, you might reasonably guess that's a person who's acting a little bit angry, right? If a person comes in and they're crying and they run upstairs and throw themselves on the bed, then good guess they're probably feeling sad, right? So for this kind of thing, you have to explain your answer a little bit. Like, I think in this situation that the character feels angry for several reasons. And you explain your reasons. First, he starts shouting at his mother. Later, he slams the door and walks off. And then finally, he kicks the dog as he walks away. These seem like the actions of an angry person. So it can be where you've got to explain things a little more than in the first type of question. Some other phrases that you might look for that indicate that they want you to make an opinion or for you to give an inference would be things like, what do you think caused this action? Or how do you imagine the character feels about what just happened? Or make a prediction about what Betty will do next based on her actions and statements in the book. In your opinion, what will the character do next? Use clues from the chapter to predict what event will happen next. Okay, connections. This is one of those ones that some people find these really easy, some people find them really hard. Making connections are just when you find a connection or a similarity between the text you're reading and something else. And there's basically three main types of connections. First one is text to self or text to yourself, basically. You're looking for connections between what's going on in the book and your own life, the character, feelings, or events. For example, I can relate to how Josh probably feels when Karen turns him down at the dance. I bet he feels embarrassed, even though he starts acting angry, because when I have been turned down, that is how I have felt. So you're using your own experiences to help figure out how a character feels. Number two, text to text is where you're looking for connections between the text you're reading, sorry, and another text, like another story. So let's say you've read one short story by one author and you've read another short story by a different author, but they have some similarities. Maybe the main characters have the same types of jobs. Here's an example of how that might sound. Both Maggie and Jennifer are nurses in the middle of a war. Maggie is in the Middle East in modern times, and Jennifer is a nurse in World War I. But they both feel overwhelmed by all the death and despair they see around them. So now I wanted to put out that I don't know why. Hang on a second. For some reason, the numbers have disappeared on this. So I'm gonna just kind of fill this in. There we go. Oop. Hang on. Let's see. There we go. Okay. Oh, yep. No, just do it. Okay, let's see if it'll let me do this. Two. There we go. Okay. I think in the original, sometimes it just when I move it around, it decides to disappear. I don't always notice. My apologies. Okay. And then we've got text to world. This is a little bit similar to text to self, but sometimes there's things happening in a book that aren't anything we've gone through. Like I haven't been in a war, but I know about wars from newspapers and from what I've seen on TV. So maybe I would want to talk about it in comparison to that, and it might help me understand it. So things like, for example, uh, wars, natural disasters, marriage if you've never been married, having children if you've never had children, chronic illnesses if you've never had those kind of things. So this book is occurring in the aftermath of a hurricane. I have never been in a hurricane, but I have watched the news during Hurricane Katrina and saw the reports on the lack of food, clean water, and safe housing. So this book seems very realistic to me. And I would explain because they also have kind of those kind of things going on. So these are just some ways for you to use what you already know to help yourself understand what you're reading better. Okay. So it's just kind of summarizing, ask some questions before you read. What can you ask yourself before reading? What do I already know? I wonder if. Now, they said dot, dot, dot. That means they want you to finish the question. I wonder if the character is happy. I wonder if the character is going to break up with his girlfriend. I wonder if he's going to start drinking. All those kind of ideas. What do I need to know? This is one that you might not necessarily ask in a story, but might come up if you were reading like a textbook. Other questions that might come up are things like what might happen? Who are the characters? Where are they? What genre is this? What problem might happen? What conflict might occur? So assignment 6 is all about what we're going to do before we read. So don't touch the book. Well, don't read the book yet. We're going to just start it by thinking about it. So the book is Jimmy Comes Home. It's part of a series called the Green Star Lake series. It's by an author called Robert Checkwich. And before we start, we just want you to kind of take a look at the cover and think about the book. Use the following questions to guide you. I think I may have changed this a little bit. Indicate, I'm not worried about this part anymore. Where it says indicate whether the question is, I took that part out because people were having such a hard time with it that I just decided to get rid of it. Okay, so don't worry about this part. Okay, check your, oops, sorry. Hang on. Paste. There we go. Check your book and you can see, but I don't think it has that in there. Think about the title, Jimmy Comes Home, and write at least 3 sentences to predict what will happen. Now, I occasionally get people say something like, I predict Jimmy will come home. Yeah, that's kind of already said. They're kind of telling us that. Jimmy comes home from where? Jimmy comes home why? Jimmy is who? All those kind of ideas. Be a little more specific than I think Jimmy will come home, because I feel like that's pretty obvious because of the title, okay? Yeah. Remember that predictions are based in the future. They don't state information we already know. So yeah, what I'm saying, don't predict Jimmy will tell us home. It's already told us that. Um, you also don't want to predict things that happened. I predict that Jimmy was away somewhere. Well, yeah, obviously, because Jimmy couldn't come home if he hadn't been away. It's already happened, and the title kind of already includes that. Tell me what you think is going to happen, not what has already happened. Okay? So here's an example. Here's a book. I haven't read this book. It's by a guy named John Green. There's kind of a picture of a little map on it, and it says paper towns. So I'm just going to make a prediction. It doesn't matter if my predictions are right or wrong. What matters is, are my predictions reasonable? Are they based on what I'm looking at and what I'm thinking about? So the title of this book is called Paper Towns. You also see a map with a pin stuck in it. I predict that the main character in this book travels or wants to travel to many different places. I predict that many of the towns may seem better on paper than when they get there in real life. The word paper also makes me think of something fragile. So I think maybe the character's picture of the towns may be kind of fragile and easily torn apart once he or she visits the town in person. Okay. So you can make a prediction about the main character. I predict that Jimmy, what's he going to do? You could make a prediction about other characters. I predict that Jimmy's old friends might. You can make a prediction about events that might happen. I predict that Jimmy's school might. You can make a prediction about the type of conflict or problems that might happen. I predict that the conflict in the story will be between who and who. So, and then we're still thinking about the title. Does it suggest any connections or raise any questions? So a lot of people tell me at least one connection, and then they tell me the 3 questions, okay? Think about the plot, okay? Plot is the major events in the book. Try to think of big questions that will help you understand the story, not small questions about details that don't make no difference, like what is Jimmy wearing? I mean, it doesn't matter, does it? Look for bigger, more important questions, okay? Um, okay, so thinking about the connections, has Jimmy coming home? Have you come home from somewhere after a long while? What did it make you feel like? Why were you away? What was it like? Talk a little bit about that idea, okay? What do you think about the title? The title reminds me of a time when. The title makes me wonder. The title makes me think about. That's the kind of idea. Making connections to yourself could be similar events or situations, similar personality traits, similar heritage, culture, religion, gender, age, sexual orientation, similar feelings, similar interests or activities, similar strengths or weaknesses, similar friends, family, or romantic relationships, similar communities, regions, landforms, climate, or politics. So sometimes people will get very literal and they'll only look at one specific thing, like, oh, it's a boy? Well, I can't relate to him at all. Well, that's not true, right? Like boys and girls have similar emotions. Or, that person lives up north and I live in the city, so I can't connect. Well, is that really true? There may still be connections. So I'm trying to give you some examples so you can look for deeper types of connections, not just the most superficial things, okay? Um, Creating three stories, you can use question words, things like who, when, where, why, how, what, or what happened. Remember how we talked earlier about inverted type questions? A lot of the verbs like that are things like do, is, are, will, or have. Those might be used at the beginning of a question, okay? But you can't just write a question word. If I just say who, that is not adequate for the course. I won't give you the marks for that. It needs to be a full question, not just a one word. Like, how do you think community members will treat Jimmy? How will people at the school feel to have him back? That kind of idea, okay? Uh, ba, ba, ba. Here's an example using the title Paper Towns. I think the title Paper Towns is interesting. It reminds me of the time I went to New York and imagined that it would be very exciting, and instead it was dirty and smelly and kind of scary. My dreams of New York felt like paper that got ripped up. Three questions I might have about this novel are, does he travel in real life or is it only in his imagination? What does he learn about life in his travels, real or imagined? Does the main character get what he wants or dreams about? And then this one, the length of the novel. What do you think about it? Is it seem way too long, way too short, just right? Organization of the novel. How is it split up? What chapters, chapter headings? Are there quotes? Are the chapters short? Are the chapters long? That kind of idea. Level of language. Is the language easy to understand? Just kind of normal, average, where you think everybody can understand? Is it really hard to understand? Just kind of look it over and think about it. Okay. Because you're stating your opinion, you might say things like, I think, I feel, I believe, that kind of idea. I think the length of the novel is too long, too short, just right. I feel like the organization of the novel is, what do you think about it? I think the level of the language is, you decide. Okay. Now, a lot of times they've got like a little ellipse. Ellipse is these three dots, dot, dot, dot. Um, when you see those, it shows you that words are either being omitted or left out or that the sentence isn't finished. So in some of these assignments that we're doing, it means they want you to finish the sentence. So if you see a prompt that says, I wonder, dot, 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 they want you to finish the sentence with something that you wonder about. You aren't going to start a whole new sentence of your own. It has to start with those words, but you're going to finish the sentence that is already there. Like, I wonder why Jimmy doesn't want to talk to Teresa. Now, ellipse can also be used for other meanings, okay? You may be more familiar with this. In dialogue or thought bubbles, sometimes they'll use an ellipse, dot, 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 to show that the character's kind of trailed off into silence and has stopped talking. Like Betty said, Lynn lied when she told the police she was with me. Maybe she's the one who... She doesn't finish the word. We don't know what it is. Sometimes it's used to indicate a pause for dramatic effect. Sherlock looked around the room at all the suspects gathered there. The murderer is Lady Ashton. Sometimes it's used to indicate that there's more information to come. You'll see this in comic books sometimes where it'll say, to be continued, dot, dot, dot. Okay. So rap rock, I don't know if you've heard of this. Sometimes it's just shorted to rap. It's just kind of a little acronym to help you think about how to answer short answer questions, okay? And so the first R is for restate. Use the words from the question to begin your answer. A, answer the question. P, prove. Prove your idea with examples and details from the text. R, you can relate, make a connection to yourself or other texts or the world. Opinion, explain what you think and why. Conclude and wrap it up with a good ending. So, for example, if the question was, why is Jimmy upset at the airport when he hears that they started going through everyone's bags? Now, I didn't care for their particular answer, so I sort of did one myself, okay? Now, you don't need to use all 6 of these prompts for every single short question. But if a question's worth like 5 or 6 marks, it's a good idea. Okay. If it's only worth 1 or 2, they're probably not looking for that detailed an answer. So restate Jimmy is upset at the airport because he hears that they have started going through everyone's luggage. He feels that this is an invasion of privacy because he does not have anything illegal on him. I prove it. Well, Jimmy says, no bloody way they're searching my body. I just left Jivvy 4 hours ago. How could I have anything on me? Relate. I always hate when they search my bags, as it makes me feel guilty even when I haven't done anything. Opinion. I don't really think they should do that, as it assumes you're a criminal. Conclude. I think Jimmy has a right to be upset and suspicious about this. Okay. Now, I wouldn't normally put all these little items in the front. I would just run these together as a paragraph, right? So here is assignment number 7. This is once you start reading chapter 1. There are questions that you can ask yourself. You can also look at the questions that I am asking. It's a good idea to read them because it helps you notice the answers. Some people will even have like the book in one hand and their assignment right next to them so they can just write answers down as they read. And that is fine. Now, there are 6 questions, but they're kind of spread out. So sometimes people get confused and don't notice them as much. Now, check on the 6 questions. Okay, guys, I feel like I may have added 1 or 2 questions to this, but take a look. Where did Jimmy spend the last 18 months of his life? Why was he there? How does Jimmy feel about being home? Use clues from the text to answer this. This is worth 2 marks. These are both answered right within the first page or 2. Remember to answer in complete sentences. So Jimmy spent the last 18 months in, tell me where, because he, why was he there? Don't just say one word, okay? Number 3, pretend that a friend has asked you what this book is about and what Jimmy is like. Write a message to your friend giving your opinion of Jimmy, the situation he's in, and any interesting comments you may like to share with your friend. The purpose is to get your friend to read the book so that the 2 of you can discuss it together. Remember that opinions often start with things like I think, I feel, I believe. What do you think about Jimmy or the situation or the book? Number 4, as you were reading the text, was there a point where you paused to think about something in your own life or something that you have read or watched before? Pick only 2 of the prompts. There's 4 prompts down there. See these 4 sentences? Pick 2 of them and use them as the beginning of your sentence. And then where it has the ... well, I want you to finish it with your own ideas. So your possible sentence beginnings could be, this text reminds me of a time in the real world when this part makes me think about, this text is similar to my life because the character named reminds me of, so you would pick any 2 you want that you feel you can talk about. Okay, we've talked about this already. I'm not going to go over that because I'm running kind of low on time. Number 5, they want you to go back to question number 6 after you've read the whole chapter, okay? Think about or take a look at one of your original predictions. Tell me what it was. Was your prediction right or wrong? Tell me what happened if it was right or wrong. And then make a new prediction for chapter 2 about what Jimmy might do next. And tell me why you think that. Based on what? And then try to visualize or picture what Jimmy's world looks like. Draw 4 pictures in the spaces on the next page or in blank paper in order to illustrate 4 major events. Now, this can be stick figures. I'm looking for your ideas and that you understood what was happening. I am not marking your art at all, okay? This is called visualizing. Some people automatically picture or visualize things when they read. Other people don't. They have to kind of stop and deliberately stop and think about what things might look like. So this might also change depending on what type of activity is going on in a story and how you're familiar with it. So, for example, I'm not very familiar with the British game of cricket. So, if I was reading a story about it, I might have to stop and think about what each person is doing and how that playing field looks to have a better understanding of a game if it was in a book. Where if it was a story about, say, basketball or hockey, I understand those games pretty well. I can probably picture that pretty easily without much effort. Okay. So think about what are the four main things that happen in the chapter? Where do they occur? Who would be in that picture? What emotions might they be feeling? Here's one example. I've drawn a little plane. Here's Jimmy. You can see just Jimmy's just sitting there. Little propeller plane. I've drawn a little picture of Green Lake community. I did some little swirls here to show that there's water. And it just says Jimmy is flying home, Green Lake community. Labels can be helpful so that I understand what you're doing. And then you would do each one of these. Okay. Okay. Hang on a sec. Uh, Inference. Uh, Oxford Languages defines an inference as a reasonable conclusion based on the evidence of evidence and reasoning. Researchers are entrusted with drawing inferences from the data. I'm trying to figure out why I'm doing this. Oh, okay. I'm going to kind of stop there. I think this is coming up because of what we're going to talk about in the next part, so I'm just going to leave it for right now. If you see the reading logs, this is not to be handed in right now. You fill it in and hand it in at the end with the portfolio. I'll try and talk about that a little bit more tomorrow. If you have any questions, shoot me an email. I'll be happy to talk to you. And good luck. Have a good evening and good luck with your assignments.